Hey guys, in today's video you will learn the real story of Thorian Wells, a shepherd who froze to death high in the mountains and had a revealing near-death experience. On the other side, he discovered the truth about heaven, and what he saw contradicts everything we learn in religions. So leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss anything. And comment below which city you are watching so we can get to know each other better. Now get ready, because this story will touch your soul. For more than 2 decades, I was the pastor of Morning Ridge Baptist Church, a small town in rural Colorado surrounded by towering mountains. The city was peaceful, but at the same time, it was marked by the monotonous routine that was repeated month after month, year after year. I have always been a man of unwavering faith, but over the years, I realized that something was missing. The words I preached during services were starting to ring hollow even to me. It wasn't that my faith had diminished, but the way I lived it, with each repeated sermon and each encounter with the community, was moving me away from true connection with the divine. I saw the same faces every week, the same prayers, the same automatic responses. It seemed that everyone's faith was more centered on traditions than on direct experience with God. I wondered if I was guiding people correctly, or if I was just perpetuating a cycle of soulless rituals. The worst of all was the emptiness that began to grow inside me. I knew there was something bigger, something beyond what I could achieve with words and actions. My wife, Martha, was always by my side, with an attentive and silent gaze. She felt the same restlessness as I did. Many nights after dinner, we sat in silence, reflecting on what had been lost. I knew she missed me, the true deep connection to myself and spirituality. It was then that I made the decision. I needed a break. A true break, not only physically, but spiritually. I needed to distance myself from all of this, seek answers in the silence, where the noise of expectations no longer reached me. I didn't know exactly what I would find, but I felt it was an urgent need. When I shared my decision with the congregation, reactions were mixed. Some were supportive, but many were confused, even worried. After all, the shepherd leaving the flock for a while was unthinkable. Martha didn't say much. I knew how much it affected her, but she didn't stop me. "You're doing this for you, Thorian. I just hope you find what you're looking for." Her words kept echoing in my mind. In the days following my decision, I was torn. At the same time as I felt an urgent need to find something deeper, there was a part of me that feared the unknown. What would it be like to live without the title of pastor, without the routine that has always defined my life? I knew that questions about my absence would echo throughout the city, and more than a few people had already begun to whisper in the church corridors. Martha watched me with wary eyes, as if trying to read my every decision. She didn't need to say anything. His silence said it all. I knew she feared what I might discover in this process. The nights dragged on, and the fear of leaving the congregation, of ceasing to be who I was, consumed me. On the morning of my last service before the sabbatical, the church was fuller than ever. People crowded into the pews, eager to hear what I had to say. I looked at them, trying to capture every face, every expression, as if I were saying goodbye to them all. When I reached the pulpit, a feeling of disconnection came over me. I felt like I was an actor playing a role that no longer belonged to me. The sermon was prepared, but the words came out without soul. It was no longer about the message I was conveying, but about what I myself was looking for. "Guys, I need to be honest with all of you," I said, feeling my chest tighten. "I'm moving away for a while. It's not an escape, but a search. A search for something I feel like I lost along the way." The silence in the church was heavy, almost palpable. I could see the worried eyes of some, and the others murmuring. Even Martha up front seemed to be holding her breath. "But I'll be back. I don't know when, but I promise I'll be back, transformed." I knew I was leaving for something unknown, but I was convinced that it was necessary. I walked away from the altar and realized that this gesture, this choice to walk away, would be more meaningful than any sermon I could have preached. It was during this period of uncertainty that, unexpectedly, I received a call from Caleb Stroud, my childhood friend. Caleb had always been the opposite of me. He never worried about rituals or the obligations of being seen as an example to others. He lived his own way, seeking adventures in the mountains and in places I would never dare to go. Still, he always had an unwavering respect for my faith, even if he didn't share it. The call came on a cold January morning. I was in my office, where I spent most of my time, reflecting on what lay ahead. The sound of the phone broke the silence in my house. "Thorian, are you ready for an adventure?" said Caleb in his deep, excited voice. "I am planning an expedition to the Eagle Peaks. We need one more guy on the team, and I thought this might be a good opportunity for you to step back a little and get your head straight." I hesitated for a moment. An expedition into the mountains seemed to be the opposite of what I imagined. I was looking for something spiritual, something internal, and going to the mountains with Caleb felt more physical and practical. But there was something about the invitation that attracted me. The silence of the mountains, the isolation, the chance to be away from everything and everyone, to reconnect with something more primal and divine, without the distractions of the world. I knew I needed something radical, something that would take me out of my routine and force me to see the world in a different way. "I don't know, Caleb. You know I've never been good with these things. I'm a shepherd, not a mountaineer." He laughed on the other end of the line. "I help you. And believe me, Thorian, the divine is everywhere. The mountain may be closer to God than you imagine." He knew what he was talking about. Despite his irreverence, Caleb had a connection to nature that I've always admired, even if I didn't fully understand it. I didn't know exactly what to expect, but I knew this experience would be unlike anything I've ever experienced. In the EE, and I accepted. I knew I needed this break, this physical distance, and perhaps, in an unexpected way, the mountains could be the place where I would find what I was looking for, a direct connection with the divine. The days leading up to the expedition were a mixture of anxiety and preparation. Caleb arrived at my house with his huge camping backpack, a wide smile on his face and the vibrant energy of someone about to embark on another adventure. I, on the other hand, felt a little out of place with all the survival gear and tools he had. The idea of being in the middle of nature, without the family protection of the church or the certainty of a religious structure, made me uneasy. "Here's what you'll need," Caleb said, handing me a heavy backpack. "Climbing crampon, ice pick, cold-resistant sleeping bag. The rest you'll learn along the way." I watched him with a mixture of admiration and concern. I had never done anything like this before, and the thought of getting away from the city for a week made me even more nervous. As a pastor, I have never found myself out of control or without a way to deal with others. But here, in the icy mountain wilderness, there was no sermon to comfort me, no congregation that depended on me. On the day of departure, we found ourselves on the highway, far from any sign of civilization. The drive to base camp was long and exhausting, with the weather slowly changing to something more severe as we got closer to the mountains. The sky was cloudy, and the wind cut into our faces with an intensity I had never experienced before. Nature was silent, but this silence was not empty. It was dense, deep, as if the earth itself was breathing slowly, waiting. With each step we took on the trail, the feeling of being far from everything and everyone began to envelop me. Caleb walked ahead of me with ease, his steps steady and sure, while I felt like a fish out of water trying to adjust to the rhythm. I looked around at the tall trees and mountains that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky, and I felt small. But at the same time, there was something comforting about this isolation. It was as if nature was calling me to something deeper, something words couldn't explain. As the sun began to set, the cold began to set in. Caleb set up the shelter deftly while I tried to keep up, feeling every muscle in my body protesting the physical effort. But as I looked toward the horizon, where the golden light of the sunset spread over the mountains, I felt a sense of peace that had been lost to me for so long. Night came quickly, and darkness set in with frightening intensity. I huddled in my sleeping bag, but the cold didn't seem to want to leave me alone. Next to me, Caleb was already dozing, immune to nature's discomfort. I looked up at the sky, trying to find comfort in the stars. There, in the middle of the mountains, the world seemed much bigger and much quieter than I had ever imagined. The first few days of our expedition were more difficult than I imagined. The mountains were a constant physical test. Every step through the deep snow seemed to require twice as much energy, and the thin air made breathing heavier with every meter we covered. I found myself fighting my body, which didn't seem to want to follow Caleb's pace as he walked ahead with ease. "Don't worry, Thorian," Caleb said on the third day as he adjusted the crampons on his climbing shoes. "The difficult part is at the beginning, then your body gets used to it." But the truth was, I wasn't just fighting physical fatigue. I was also fighting the emptiness inside me, the feeling of being far from everything and everyone, far from the church, from the obligations that defined me for so long, seemed to disorient me. I didn't know if I was searching for God or just trying to escape everything that made me feel insecure. But there was something about the mountains that I couldn't ignore. At each rest break, I looked around and felt a connection with nature that couldn't be explained. The silence there was profound, almost palpable. There was no constant sound of voices that I was used to hearing in Morning Ridge, no noise of the city, no pressure of expectations. There was only the sound of the wind, the rustling of trees, and the distant echo of falling stones. At night, as we sat around the fire to cook, I felt at peace. Caleb talked about his past adventures, the mountains he'd climbed and the people he'd met. He seemed so at ease in that environment, as if he were part of the land. I, on the other hand, felt like a stranger in my own body, trying to understand my own presence there. When I looked up at the sky, the stars were shining with an intensity I had never seen before. They seemed to observe me, as if inviting me to understand something beyond myself. But as time passed, the weight of the experience increased. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was about to happen. There was a restlessness in the air, as if the mountains had something to tell me, something I couldn't yet understand. No seventh day, the mountain revealed itself in all its ferocity. The climate, which until then had been cold but bearable, changed drastically. The sky, which had previously been clear, quickly filled with heavy gray and threatening clouds. The wind, which was already strong, now blew with a violence that cut the skin like sharp blades. The snow, which had started as a light dusting, turned into a merciless storm. "We're going to have to go back to base camp," Caleb shouted, fighting the wind. His face was red. His eyes squinted against the snow bearing down on him. "Now!" I didn't need to be an experienced mountaineer to know the weather was about to get worse. The thin air became more difficult to breathe, and each step was a considerable effort. The cold seeped into my bones, and I felt the extremities of my body beginning to lose sensation. With the wind howling in our faces, we tried to turn back, but the descent was not easy. The trails had disappeared beneath the drifting snow, and the landmarks Caleb had shown us had disappeared into the white mists. I could barely see the path ahead, and the only thing keeping me moving was Caleb's presence in front of me, with his blind trust in the trail he apparently knew so well. But the mountain did not spare us. During the descent, we reached a point where the trail narrowed and a wall of steep rocks appeared in front of us. Snow had accumulated, covering slippery rocks, making the climb even more dangerous. Just as I tried to climb down a higher rock, my boot slipped and I fell, hitting my back against a rock. The impact was so strong that for an instant, I lost my breath. Trying to compose myself, I realized that Caleb was already around me, extending his hand. "I knew this part would be difficult," he said, trying to remain calm, but his eyes were tense. "The storm won't pass anytime soon. We need to find shelter." No matter how hard we tried, the storm intensified by the minute. Visibility was close to zero, and the wind was becoming more aggressive. We no longer had the resources to stay warm for long. Each breath felt more difficult, the body heavier. I no longer knew which was worse, the cold that burned my skin, or the fear that was beginning to grow inside me, a feeling that we were on the brink of something much greater than our ability to control. That's when everything became hazier. The storm wasn't just physically freezing us, it seemed to swallow us, as if the world itself was trying to erase us. It was at this point, as the wind roared and the snow fell nonstop, that I felt my body begin to give way. Every step I took was heavier, more difficult, as if the air itself was stopping me from breathing. My vision became blurry, and suddenly I felt a crushing weight in my chest, as if an invisible force was squeezing me. The cold was so intense that I could no longer feel the ends of my body. My body was becoming a mass of pain and fatigue, and my mind, already exhausted, was beginning to distance itself from reality. I looked at Caleb, but he was ahead, fighting the storm. There were no more words between us, just the fight for survival. It was as if the world around us had become a blur of ice and wind. I could barely keep my eyes open. Then, without warning, my legs gave out and I fell to my knees in the snow. My arms could no longer support me. I looked up at the sky, where the storm was spreading, covering everything. The silence that followed was so profound that even the sound of the wind seemed to disappear. I lay down in the snow, completely exhausted, feeling like I couldn't go on. I wasn't scared anymore. The intense cold no longer bothered me, nor did the pain. I was going somewhere, but where? There was no more dread, just a sense of surrender. The body seemed to dissolve, as if it were becoming part of the environment, part of the snow that enveloped me. The void in me was filled with an inexplicable peace. It was then that the light appeared. It was not an ordinary light, nor was it warm or bright in a way that I could describe it in a human way. It was a pure, enveloping, welcoming light that seemed to pierce my soul and fill me completely. I didn't see it with my eyes, but I felt it in every fiber of my being. It was as if I was being embraced by the universe itself, by something much greater, and it brought an indescribable calm. The way light enveloped me completely, erasing all the pain, all the fears. There was no more room for suffering. It was as if I were floating in an infinite immensity, where time and space did not exist. All I felt was the presence of absolute peace. There were no words, no need for words. He was. Amid this feeling of absolute tranquility, my mind began to review my life. It wasn't a critical analysis or a charge. It was a simple experience understanding. I saw the moments that had been filled with love and care, but I also saw the moments when I failed, when my actions did not reflect the light that I now felt so clearly. I realized the pain I caused others and the mistakes I made, but interestingly, there was no judgment, just a deep sense of understanding and regret, mixed with a deep sense of forgiveness and acceptance. I understood, without words, that heaven was not a distant place with golden gates. Heaven was a state of union with the divine, a connection with the light that filled everything around me, and withal, it was not a prize for the good, but a reality that was always within our reach, within us. And at that moment, I realized that this light wasn't just there, in the sky. It was in every human being, waiting to be recognized. The light that surrounded me seemed to pulse like a heart. It was something alive, something who knew me in a more intimate way than I could understand. There was no room for fear, for doubts. I felt a deep peace, a sense of belonging to something much bigger than I could realize while I was living. Every atom of my being was in tune with the vastness of that light, and I felt in some way full. In my mind, there were no more questions but understanding. The answers came like a gentle wave, and all I had to do was just to feel. There was no longer a separation between me and creation, me and the divine, me and the light. The feeling of being one with everything was so total that there was no longer any distinction between me and the universe. Every breath, every heartbeat, everything was in perfect harmony with the cosmic energy that filled the space. In this state of surrender and understanding, I began to review my life clearly and objectively. It was not a cold analysis, but an experience. I saw the times when I did good, when I helped carry the burdens of others. I also saw the moments when my faith was superficial, the moments when I failed those who trusted me, the moments when I thought more about what others expected of me than what was really important. There was no shame or agonizing regret, but rather a deep understanding that every action, every choice was part of my path to getting there. There were no trials. There were no convictions. There was only understanding. I felt the pain of those I hurt and the love of those who loved me. I understood that true connection with the divine was not about being perfect, but about being genuine. About seeking the light within yourself and others, about seeing the divinity in others. The light showed me that the sky was not a place, but a condition to be. It was union with divine love, which transcends all physical and spiritual barriers. And then when everything seemed at peace, a soft but firm voice echoed inside me. It was not an external voice, but a voice that came from within, from a source so deep that I could barely understand it. "You have a choice, Thorian," the voice said. "You can stay here, in eternal peace, or you can go back and fulfill your mission in the world. The choice is yours." The light, although welcoming, didn't force me to do anything. There was no rush, there was no urgency. I felt the choice to stay, to lose myself forever in the peace that enveloped my being. But then, I remembered Martha, Caleb, all the people still in the world who needed something that I might be able to offer. It was as if the light showed me that my mission was not yet completed, that I had something more to do, something to share. I knew, deep down in my being, that the choice to return was not an obligation. It was a decision driven by love. For the love I had for the people who depended on me, for the love I felt for life, for the love that I finally understood to be the true essence of the divine. With a sigh, I made my decision. "I choose to return," I replied, my voice breaking the immensity of peace that surrounded me. The light seemed to intensify for a moment, as if confirming my choice, and then gently, it began to fade. I knew that despite returning to the physical world, I would not return the same. Something in me had changed forever. The return was something I couldn't describe in words. It wasn't a smooth transition, nor was it a gradual return to my fitness. It was more like I was forced to condense myself back into flesh and blood, like my spirit was being pulled back into my body, but with such painful intensity that I could barely comprehend it. The material world enveloped me again in an abrupt and painful way. Each breath felt heavy and forced, as if I were rediscovering air, as if my body had forgotten how to breathe. The biting cold of the snow seemed to tear me apart, and I felt the weight of my own existence returning. Every move was a battle. My vision slowly returned, but what I saw first were Caleb's eyes, huge and full of worry. He was crouched next to me, holding my face with shaking hands. His eyes were bloodshot with pain and fear, as if he had lost me and had miraculously found me again. Thorian, you were out of your mind. I thought I lost you." His voice was muffled by the wind, but I could feel the intensity of his emotion. "You weren't breathing, man. I thought..." Could barely move my lips. The feeling of being back to reality was overwhelming, and a deep pain began to spread throughout my body. I was so weak, so vulnerable, that all I could do was whisper, I'm back." Caleb seemed to be trying to warm me, wrapping blankets around me and forcing some hot water down my throat. I knew the cold was still hitting me, but it wasn't the same cold anymore. Something inside me was warm, an inner light that still burned, albeit dimly. He helped me get up, and together, we started the way back. Although the terrain was difficult and the storm didn't let up, every step was a struggle. But there was something different now. I was no longer just surviving. I was living, and in a way I had never experienced before. I felt a connection to the world around me, to nature, to life, that I had never known existed. The physical cold still bit my skin, but my soul felt at peace. Finally, on the third day after my experience, rescue arrived. The rescue team found us, and we were taken back to civilization. I was still weak, physically down, but the human warmth and the certainty that I was back in the world were comforting. As we traveled back to the city, in silence, I thought about what I had left behind, and also on what I had found. Caleb looked at me every now and then without saying a word. He knew something in me had changed, but he didn't ask. He didn't need to. I knew he respected what I had been through and what I was now carrying. The city of Morning Ridge awaited me, but I knew I wouldn't return the same way. Upon returning to Morning Ridge, my life was never the same. During the weeks of recovery, I spent a lot of time alone, reflecting on everything I had experienced, trying to process the experience that seemed so distant, but was now the truest reality I had ever known. The body was slowly recovering from the effects of the extreme cold, but my soul was in a state of constant renewal. What I found in the mountains wasn't something I could just swallow and move on. It was not knowledge that could be preached in a single sermon or in a series of services. I knew that the mission to which I was now being called was much greater than what I had experienced until then. When I finally felt ready to return to church, I didn't know exactly what to expect. Missing Martha, the warmth of the home he had left behind, everything seemed new, everything seemed different. But what I feared most was what my congregation would think. I knew that my experience in the mountains had changed the way I saw the divine, and this change was too big to hide. The first service after my return was the most difficult of all. I went to the pulpit as I always had, but there was something new in my heart, a deep peace that could not be ignored. And most importantly, an understanding I needed to share. When I started to speak, the words came out with a force I hadn't expected. They were not words of condemnation, of rules, of rigid doctrines. I talked about the divine as something that was not distant but within each of us. It talked about how heaven was not a physical place but a spiritual reality accessible to everyone now. God is not beyond the clouds. He is not beyond the golden gates, I said, my voice firm and full of emotion. He is here, in us, in every breath, in every action of love, in every human being. But not everyone received the message with the same open heart. Many of the more traditional members looked at me skeptically. Some got up in the middle of the service and left, muttering about heresy. These people, who had always believed that heaven was a prize reserved for the righteous, seemed unable to understand what I had experienced. For them, religion was a set of rules, a rigid line between right and wrong. On the other hand, a new generation of believers, younger and willing to listen, approached me after the service. They saw the divine in a different way, more personal, more internal. I saw in his eyes the same search I felt before the expedition, and I encouraged them to look for that light within themselves, as I had found. The answer I had searched for so long on the mountain was finally beginning to be shared, not through words but through experience. Martha, despite the worry she still carried, began to understand the change in me. She saw me with a new sparkle in her eyes, as if she knew that we were now somehow closer to God than before, even without the formal answers we once sought. The town of Morning Ridge was never the same. Those people who left did not return, but those who stayed, and those who came closer, began to see faith in a deeper, more human, more universal. I learned that heaven is not a place, but a state of connection with divine love, which is accessible to everyone. And if someone asked me today if I feared death, I would say no more, because I met her. And when I found the light beyond life, I understood that the true journey is in what we leave behind. It is not our deeds, but the love we share with others. This is what remains. And that, yes, is heaven. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.